I think it can't be. Right. Shalom. Uh, Good to see everyone. Um, so I want to start out with a couple of things. I don't see anybody joining us online, but we'll record this for later, and come online, we can let them in. So I want to give you a little bit of an update, live breaking news, as it were. I want to study a bit of poetry with you. And then, as some of you heard, the rabbi's back went out a few weeks ago, and I have physical therapy that I need to leave here like at 12:58 so I can get to physical therapy on time. So we're going to go for about 55 minutes or so. Okay, right. I'm in the right place. I'm in the right place. So the update or the breaking news, I want to read you something. It's an email that we will send out to the community probably within a few hours. You're here, and I'm happy to share it with you. This is not, we're still, as you can imagine, these things go through some massaging of language, but let me at least just read you what we have so far, and I don't think there's anything in there that's, terribly different from what we'll send out. Rhoda was asking me about this on the way in, and so I'll just sort of describe to you. So yesterday evening, Jewish National Fund, JNF, held an event at Beth El. As many of you know, JNF runs the Alexander Muss High School in Israel and runs volunteer service missions in which several Beth El members, I will say, including Sheila Goldstein, have participated in this past year. JNF's mission is to promote building and connecting to the land of Israel through planting trees, building houses and parks, sourcing water solutions, buying fire trucks, and improving the lives of people with special needs. Before and during the first half of the event, a group of about 30 masked individuals with signs and bullhorns stood on Watt Street facing Beth El's entrance protesting. When the shouting began, most but Talmud Torah students had been picked up from school. Slogans chanted included "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free." Judaism, yes. Zionism, no. The state of Israel has got to go. And Rabbi Greyber, you can't hide. We charge you with genocide. And just generally shame. Chanting over bullhorns also included profanity, which I'm not going to repeat. We are grateful that all attendees at the JNF event and all Bethelians present remained calm, and that the Durham police monitored events to ensure the evening concluded without incident beyond the obvious disruptiveness. Thank you also to local clergy and interfaith friends, Reverend Katie Pro, Jamil Kadura, Bishop Ronald Gabi, Reverend Mindy Douglas, Imam Abdullah Antepli, and to Durham's Mayor Pro Tem, Mark Anthony Middleton, who've reached out with expressions of support and concern. We have reached out to the families of Talmud Torah students who witnessed last night's events. Please be in touch if there are ways we can provide additional support. As we move into larger gatherings for the upcoming high holidays, please be assured that Beth El has benefited from utilization of security grants to bolster our security. Your registration for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur services and your cooperation with our perimeter check-in plans will help. While we are grateful to live in a country where free speech is protected, we believe protesting outside a synagogue to be wrong. As a community, let each of us recommit to standing against hatred and to continuing to listen to love, and to care for one another, and to work across our differences rather than be divided by them. From Kevin Ginsburg, synagogue president, myself, and Ed Fleischman. So it's it's been quite a 24 hours. And I think in addition to just sort of the concern as to what's unfolded, I went across the street to the supervising police officer, and just, I wanted to understand what the rules were in terms of where they were allowed to be and where they were not allowed to be. And I believe that, they were on the side, a strip of grass between the sidewalk and the street. I think they had been schooled in sort of what they were allowed to do and not allowed to do. The one concern that I raised with the officer is, and in order for any of their speech to cross the line, it would have had to include a specific threat. And so while I was, as you heard, singled out and charged with genocide, that's not understood to constitute a threat to my personal safety. Not, the chants were obviously disturbing, but not a particular threat to the synagogue or to groups.
They were specific about the Israeli speaker.
Yeah, they were specific, but I did not hear any specific threats to the speaker. In other words, they were. So let me just, okay. The concern that I did raise with the officer, and that I think, is that there is a law in North Carolina that prohibits people to protest while masked. And I raised this with the supervising officer, and essentially the police chose not to enforce that statute. On the one hand, they chose not to enforce this statute because I think they were trying to limit the possibility of scuffles, and etc. And on the other hand, which I appreciate, and on the other hand, I think that law exists for a reason. And what occurred was intimidating. It was physically intimidating, and the fact that they wore masks added to that intimidation. And it is something that I want to pursue with the sheriff's department, because I think laws need to be enforced, and I think the Jewish people and our security depends upon the fair and consistent enforcement of the law. So there are questions that we're going to try and answer from many people, including some of our Talmud Torah students. It's an unfortunate event, and I think just an unfortunate piece of 21st century American Jewish life that has attenuated itself after the events of October 7th. Let me just take a moment, since I have you here. Are there any questions? I don't want the whole session to get away with this, but are there any questions that I can answer, Thomas? So it was a group of about 30 people. I believe that they did have a sign that said something like international. One of the signs, hold on, it said International Jewish Anti-Zionist Network. So there were certainly Jews who were part of that. It was not only Jewish, but that was one of the signs. Some of it hard to pinpoint exactly who was there. I, several months ago, went to a program. It was held outside of Duke, outside the Duke Chapel, where Lucy Siegel spoke about her brother Keith. And I recognized, and there was a group of protesters on the Duke campus who went by that presentation and I recognized at least some of the people who were there, from that protest. So I think it is a consistent group.
first of all, thank you. That letter was beautiful, and thank you for following up on the mask law, because that was one of the things that was, aside from the fact that they were Jews saying, you know, like, we're against Zionism and we're Jews against Zionism, that really kind of got me. The fact that no one would remove their masks, and every citizen had a mask, so they didn't want to be identified. So I really applaud you and encourage you, and if I can help to do something about that, we'd be happy to
Thank
do
you.
something.
Thank you.
And I have a video of being on this.
Okay. All right. Let's move on to learning. Let's do some learning. I brought you poems. On the table over there, I'll go and get it, is a, there are more poems, Prisha. Here's a packet. The poems that I brought you are poems that I learned. Martha, we're in here. Are poems that I learned with Rachel Korazim, who I know many of you have been learning with her online. She does a lot of online teaching, both of Israeli poetry and then of Israeli novels that have been translated into English. And she and two other translators released this book. It's called Shiva, or Shiva, Poems of October 7th. It's playing on the, if you, on a pun in Hebrew. So we refer to the events of that day as October 7th. In Hebrew, it's called Shiva Shel October. And the word Shiva means both the number 7, but also Shiva meaning the period of mourning after the death of a loved one. And so this Shiva, right, is both, again, referring to the date, but also to the period of mourning. And it's a collection of poetry that has been written in the wake of October 7th. All of the proceeds from the purchase of the book go towards a fund to support survivors of trauma. I bought a bunch of copies and have been giving some away. And I would offer to give you some, but I think I'm going to tell you, go buy a copy, right? Go buy a copy and give them to loved ones, etc. I think it's a very worthy thing. And what I did is I made I've picked out a few of them, and some of my insights will be exactly the ones from Rachel Korazim. And so forgive me for being unoriginal, but she's very good. Why wouldn't I share those? And others I think we can look at together. Well, not others, but those same ones. Let's look at them together and see what comes from our study. So the first poem, those of you who are in the Mishnah group, we on Shabbat morning, we've spent the last couple of weeks studying these as part of our Mishnah group from 8:45 to 9:30. We just did this one, so forgive the repetition. It's called Cleared for Publication. I'm going to read it first in the Hebrew. So as you open your packet, it should be the first one that's there. And I'm going to read it first in the Hebrew. I believe poetry should be heard to the extent possible in its native language, because the nature of poetry involves the sound of language. And then also I'll read the English and offer a few insights. And at some point, I'm going to start with that really complicated educational question. So what do you think? What jumps out at you? Okay. Give me 1 second, please. Hold on. Mayor Williams? There we go. Mayor. So I'm in the middle of teaching a class, but I wanted to pick up because I want everybody who I'm teaching to know that you're reaching out, and let me give you a call back, and we'll keep trying to reach each other. Okay. Okay. All right. Appreciate you, my friend. Okay. God bless. Bye. That was the mayor. We can be grateful for his expression of concern. Okay. Hutar Lifirsum is the name of this poem. I think it's very interesting. The name of the poet, Dael Rodriguez Garcia. I actually don't know much about him. Some of these I've learned. Rachel has talked about the names of the poets. I don't know much, but my impression is that he probably made Aliyah from Latin America or from South America. And well, let me read it first. Hutar lefirsum ki libenu nishbar. ובמסתרים בחדרים ריקים רבבות יבבות נחנקות בלי קול. הותר לפרסום כי דבנו הותר, ונבזזנו באפלה מן היקר מכל יקר. כבר הותר לפרסום כי זיוו הקסום המבהיק, מפני זה שאהבנו קבע. אבל תחת אותה אדמה כבר מנץ צמח עקשן משריש עד אין קץ בנלפת אהבה. Cleared for publication that our hearts are broken, and in hidden places, in empty rooms, thousands of sobs are silently choking. Cleared for publication that open season was declared on us. We were plundered in the dark of the most precious of the precious. It is already cleared for publication that the magical shining light of our beloved's face has been extinguished. However, beneath the same soil, a stubborn plant is sprouting, sending roots without end, tightly grasped with love. I'm going to share some context so that we can understand the poem more fully, and then I would really love your answer to that complicated pedagogical question. What do you think? What stirred you? What lines grabbed your attention, and why? Hutar lefirsum is cleared for publication is a phrase that Israelis will hear quite regularly, unfortunately, on the radio and on news reports. And what it indicates is that there have been deaths that have taken place in the theater of war, and that families have been notified of the deaths of their loved ones, and that now that the families have been notified, we, the press, have been given permission to publicize the names of those families. Okay, so for Israelis who are listening to the news, there is a lump in one's throat that develops whenever one hears those names, in part just out of sadness that more usually kids have died, and also out of fear. And I confess to you that I have some of this anxiety. Almost many of you know that I was the director of Ramah, California, because I never let you forget it, for 9 summers. And during that time, I probably had 180 to 200 Israeli young people on staff. Almost every one of those young people is now the age of reservists. And every time that the pictures are cleared for publication and they come up on Times of Israel, I scan the pictures to see if it's anybody I know. I was texting yesterday with a friend of mine named Erez, who is a wonderful, wonderful person, and he told me, thankfully, he's fine, that he's been in Gaza for a month or 2 months over the past year. Many of you know that we have a child who was bar mitzvah at Bethel in the Orthodox Kahila, who was finishing his army service. His unit was attacked. Thankfully, he's okay, although his commander was killed and several good friends injured. So there is this anxiety. It's a very small country. It's not an anonymous war being fought by a volunteer professional force. It's an intimate war, and so these words "hutar lefirsum" are filled with anxiety. I also, and you're working from a photocopy where I wrote some notes in my own copy. So if you see the scribble up there in the English writing, it says Israeli ethos. What that means is there is, or certainly has been for many years, an ethos in Israeli society around not really, I almost want to say, not crying publicly, or not making a public spectacle of one's grief. And part of what that was almost sort of, it's just something you didn't do. And part of what the poet is saying is now we are allowing the fact that our hearts are broken to come out into the open, maybe in a way that we didn't used to. And yet, well, let me ask you, what's the irony, right, in the poem that the poet is playing with? Because what they're saying is it's cleared for publication that our hearts are broken. But how does it continue, Krisha? And where in the poem does it say we're not going to express that? Yes, right? In hidden places, we're going to keep that hidden. Okay, we're going to tell you that it's happening, but we're still going to keep that hidden. In empty room, and there are empty rooms. There are thousands of sobs, and they're silently choking. Right? And by the way, you can't miss this. If in the lead up to the high holidays, God help me, 2 weeks Rosh Hashanah. Gotta help all of us, but I'm sorry, I'm a rabbi. Okay, I'm gonna give a little. What does it say in the Hebrew? B'chadarim rekim rivavot. Jack, what does it say? Rivavot yivavot. What is a yivava? The rabbis try to describe the sounds of the shofar. And one of the words that they use, and I believe, you can check me on this, Jack, I believe that it is actually the Hebrew that's used to describe the tears, the cries of Sisera's mother in the book of Judges, that the word yivavot, right? But I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure I'm right about that. But it is certainly, the yivavot is one of the terms that's used to describe the cries of the shofar. Okay. And so the fact that that's happening is public, is cleared for publication, but we're still going to keep it quiet. You can see in the footnote, and Jack, I should be nicer to you. I don't mean to put you on the spot every time. I love being in a community where there are such wise and wonderful people. And you should come, by the way, if you can. We should have carpools. We're still having a lunch and learn, a Shabbos dinner tomorrow night with a scholar. It's a free Shabbos dinner. You're all welcome to come. Just register so we can put some more water in the soup. And then on Shabbos, we have a wonderful speaker. His name is Aaron Kohler. But so look at the footnote. It says in hidden places. In Jeremiah 13, so Rachel called the poet, and the poet explains a reference that by using the word hidden places, There's a verse from Jeremiah 13:17. If you do not heed this, my soul will cry in hidden places. So this hidden places is also referring to the place where God cries, right? The rabbis, based on Jeremiah and based on other references, actually had this idea that when God is overwhelmed at the suffering and the inhumanity of crimes that people are committing in the world, that God goes to an inner room and cries. And that's there's a passage in Deuteronomy, we'll read it this Shabbos actually. It's a terrifying passage in the list of curses where God says that in moments of curse that God is going to Hester astir panai, I'm going to hide my face. And theologically, one of the answers to which, to questions to which there are no answers, and so there are many answers of why does suffering occur. One of the rabbinic answers to that is that what suffering occurs when God hides God's face, right? And essentially, when that happens, then human beings are given free reign in the world, and human beings and all of our evil are allowed to flourish. And so the Talmud explained, keep going the footnote, that God has a hidden chamber where he weeps for, and then the line from Jeremiah says, because of pride. And what does that mean? That God weeps for Israel's pride, which was taken from it and given to other nations, right? In other words, when in this moment Hamas was able to overwhelm Israeli forces and commit the acts of atrocity that they did, the passage in Jeremiah is understood as saying that God weeps for the puncturing of Israel's pride that was signified in that moment and in other moments when the Jewish people are overwhelmed. Now, I will claim and I will shout loudly from the rooftops. And since Rachel Korazim is not here, I will do her the greatest honor as a teacher and vigorously disagree with her. And it's easier to do when they're not here. What did I say? It was Jeremiah chapter 13, is that right? 13:17. I think she missed something. This has to be in the footnotes. I don't, go back and ask the author of the poet, because I know that the author of the poet looked up the verse that Chazal were basing it on. And how does the verse continue? Look at this translation. For you will not give heed, my inmost self must weep because of your, it translated here as arrogance, but because of pride. Now listen to the second half of the verse that doesn't get included in the footnote. My eye must stream and flow with copious tears because of the flock of the Lord is taken captive. The flock of the Lord is taken captive. Ki nishba eder Adonai. The poet is calling up on this reference, the hidden places. God cries in hidden places, not just because of the pride that was taken from Israel by its borders being overwhelmed on October 7th, but also because of the hostages. And all of that, I would argue, is part of that reference. Yes, Natalie, go ahead.
God had felt that it was free will.
Natalie asked a great question. Do you think at that point God had, you said thoughts, I'm going to say second thoughts, right, about giving us free will? Yes. And I think that because that's a Jewish thing to think, and it's a Jewish thing to think because the Torah says so, because the Torah says before God brings the flood, that God regretted all that God had made. And so I very much believe in a God who regrets and who has second thoughts. And I think that the rabbis give us the gift of a picture of God that does that too, that a God that weeps and says, you know, the cost of this free will thing, I don't know. There is a passage in the Gemara where the rabbis, we know it because later on the rabbis conclude that these and these are the words of the living God, but we forget that the argument that they were having was this was between the students of Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel. They went up into an attic and they spent 3 years arguing about the following question: is it good that the world was created, or would it have been better if the world wasn't created? And they spent 3 years arguing about it. And you know what the answer was? They took a vote. It would have been better that the world wasn't created, but now that it was, we should search our deeds, which I take to mean live the best life that we can. But they actually give voice to this sense of maybe there's more suffering in the world than not. Maybe there's more evil and wickedness in the world than not. Maybe it would have been better. And they take a vote, and that's what they give voice to it. They say, we took a vote. Nobody asked us, but that's what they vote. And I think we can conclude that. I think that there are, I think we each know times and moments of our lives where that's what it feels like in our own life. And so, yes, I do think God has second choice about that free will, but in the end, we have free will. And so, given that we have free will, we better search our deeds in this month of Elul with 2 weeks remaining before Rosh Hashanah, and think about how can we be the best people that we can be. Let me ask, I've got a few more things, but let me ask you, so what'd you think? What came to mind, Sheila?
This is very interesting. It's very sad. Very sad. But it ends with a hopeful note. A stubborn plant is sprouting, sitting without end. And it reminds me a lot of what I saw in January, this idea of Israelis and resilience, that Israelis are resilient and they keep going. And I just want to say about Bell, the author of this, she
The translator.
She has been involved in the protests since before October 7th, and since October 7th, and she goes every week and she posts on her Facebook page, and they're still out there saying, let's have a ceasefire, let's bring the hostages home, let's get rid of Netanyahu in huge numbers. And she goes every single week that she's in Israel. And I think that talks more about what the poem is talking about this sending groups around and taking rest.
Right. We are, by the way, the word there is akshan, right? We are, well, actually that's not, but it means stubborn. We're a stubborn people, which sometimes gets us into trouble. And yet there's also something good. Let me just pull a thread. To give a sense, because you saw this in January. And I think, so what holiday is publicizing associated with in the Jewish tradition? Well, Purim, that's correct. And Purim is one of them, the miracle of Purim. And there's one other, Hanukkah. Okay. And the phrase for publicizing the miracle is Pirsuma de Nisa. It's an Aramaic phrase, but it's this word, pirsum, huta lefirsum, pirsum, publicizing the miracle. And there are a few things to note. This poem, I believe, came out around Hanukkah. And this is not publicizing the miracle. This is publicizing that our hearts are broken. And I think part of what's happening in this poem, is that this past Hanukkah was an anti-Hanukkah, right? It's publicizing not light, but darkness. What does it say about light in the poem? It is already cleared, I'm 2/3 of the way down. It is already cleared for publication that the magic shining light of our beloved's face has been extinguished. There's a mitzvah on Hanukkah to take the Chanukiah, the lights of the Chanukiah, the candles, and to go and place them in the window to declare the miracle of Hanukkah, right? Which, by the way, is both a declaration of light, but the rabbis sort of tamed it. It's also a military victory. And this was the anti-Hanukkah. It was not a military victory. It was a military failure. And the lights, all of the lights that were extinguished, right? So this is a Hanukkah poem. And also, what's the holiday that comes after Hanukkah? Tu B'Shvat. What do we do on Tu B'Shvat? We plant trees. However, beneath the same soil, a stubborn plant is sprouting, sending roots without end, tightly grasped with love. We have the move from Hanukkah to Tu B'Shvat. And in the South, I have not been there to the site of the Nova Festival. But from what I understand, it is now filled with trees. That on Tu B'Shvat, thousands of Israelis went to the Nova Festival and planted trees, one in memory of each of the hundreds of young people who were killed in that very spot. Other questions, other thoughts? Let's do another. So this one is called Hanichot Pikud Ha'oref Hadashot L'Sichot Chulin. So Pikud Ha'oref, Oref is a strange word. It means the back of the neck. Last week's Torah portion, last week's or 2 weeks ago, at the end of Shoftim, says if there's a body left out in the middle of nowhere between cities, there's this strange ritual that you take an animal that's never pulled a plow, and the arafta, you kill it by way of chopping the back of its neck. Okay, Oref is the back of the neck, and in modern Israeli Hebrew, Pikuda Oref is the home front. And I think the idea is that when you're on the home front, you look at the front line and you see the backs of the necks of all the soldiers, right? Where you see the backs of the necks of the soldiers as they go away to war, right? So that's that Pikud HaOref. And this is in a section of the book that's about language and about how when terrible tragedies and crimes take place, we lose a sense of language. We struggle to put into words. And so I'm going to read you in the Hebrew, and there's so much that's lost in the translation. But we can help. But I'll read the Hebrew first and then the English. Ma nishma butal, uvinkomo nishal ma nishmat, ma nishbar, ma nishar. Ma kore Ne'esar uvimkomo nitche makores manigbar. Bimkom ma shlomcha hechatzuf nakdim panim mul chavarenu v'nishal ma milchamtecha. Uvimkom hatshuva hashigura b'shigra aleha hutal vato chamor shebachamorim etzli hakol beseder yesh lahashiv hakol besedek. V'hamafkidim b'divrei emet ya'anu hakol b'shever. Hakol b'shever. Homefront commands new regulations for small talk. And let me just make clear, this isn't real, right? The state of Israel did not issue new homefront regulations for how to speak with each other. The poet is talking about how you can't even do small talk the same way as you used to. During this class, I got a call from the mayor, and the mayor said, I'm not even going to ask you how you're doing. And it was this recognition of something just happened, and all of those ways that we address each other have to shift, right, as an acknowledgement. So I'll do this the way that Rachel does. Even if you don't speak Hebrew, you know the word Shema, right? You might know it. The prayer, Shema Yisrael. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Israel's most, our most important statement of faith. So the way that you ask somebody how you doing is Ma Nishma, right? What do you hear? Right? What do you hear? What's the news? Ma Nishma, right? And the poet says, what do you hear? What's up? They translated it, what's up? That's canceled, right? Instead, we are to use language of, and now listen to just, these are the different words, but listen to it in the Hebrew. Instead of nishma, we're going to keep the nun and the shin, and the mem, nishm, but we're going to say manishmat or manishbar or manishar. Okay, what's shaken up? Shmat also, Jack, will you help me with this? It has a sense of like wiped out, right? Shmita, right, is the legal practice of wiping out loans, right? Wiping out debts. So they say what's shaken up. I might have gone with, what's I don't know, whatever. I don't know, but what it has this sense of what's wiped out. Manishbar, this word shever, nishbar, means shattered. It actually comes up at the end of the poem also, when it says hakol b'shever, right? That means they've translated everything as shattered. I probably would have what is shattered, is what I would have kept those consistent. What's shattered, or broken, right? Something with shabur is something that's broken. And man nishar, I honestly don't get what they're talking about when they say what's blown up. Nishar means what remains, right? So I really, you can ask Rachel about that, but it means what remains. What, right? Is there anything left? Right? So you don't say, how's it going? You say, is there anything good? Is there anything good going on right now? Right? Manishar, right? What remains from that, from what happened? Instead of makore, right? What's going on? that's been banned, and alternatives are ma kores. Kores is to, when something like the temple is, you would say the temple's necharab, or you could say kores, sort of collapsed. And man nikbar, they've translated as forever gone, but the word kever means a grave, what's buried, right? What's buried. The way that you ask somebody in Hebrew, how are you? Another way that you ask someone is ma shlomcha. What is ma is what, and what do you hear in the word shlomcha? Shalom. You're asking someone, what is your peace? Okay. I believe, by the way, that you can study the laws of Avelut, the laws of mourning in the Jewish tradition, and the laws of Avelut will say that during the time of Shiva, there are restrictions on whether a mourner is allowed to initiate a greeting or respond to a greeting. And I believe that the sort of the core of that, like, why wouldn't you be able to respond to a greeting? I believe that the core of it is you're not allowed to say to someone who is mourning the words ma shlomcha, what's your peace? Why? Because you don't have any peace. You don't have wholeness, shalem, right? You don't have wholeness. You don't have peace. And there's something almost offensive to say to someone who's broken, what's your peace? Right? And so I think that's actually the core of this idea of avelut. And here, by the way, it's also described in the poem as hechatzuf. It's instead of the rude, like it's rude to walk through the world, right? And again, right, the mayor just exemplified that, right? It would almost be rude to be like, hey, what's up? How's your peace? And then, right? There has to be something in the greeting that recognizes the brokenness. And it's flipping, it's reading what is your peace, and it's flipping it to say, now what you have to do is you have to say, Ma milchamtecha, how's your war? Right? And there is a very big sense in which when you're interacting with Israelis, when I text people, right, when I call them, when I say to them, tell me how's it going, what I am saying to them is, tell me how the war is affecting you. Right? I'm asking them about the war, because that's the situation that they're in the middle of. How's your war? Right? It makes a lot more sense. Forbidden by strict veto power to say, Etzli Hakol Seder, right? Everything's fine. Right? No, you have to acknowledge things are not beseder. And by the way, what's the meal? What's the name of the meal on Passover? I know you're just about to go. It's okay. But what's the name of the meal on Passover? Seder. Seder means order. So when you want to say everything's okay, you say it's beseder. Everything's in order. Everything's in place, right? But colloquially, it becomes seder, right? It's okay. Seder, right? But we're not saying that anymore. It's besedek, right? A sedek is a crack. And if we're truthful, we have to say beshever, right? It's everything's broken. Everything's broken. Responses, thoughts, reactions?
That translation is so much better than this year.
Happy to help. Happy to. Thank you. All right. We're going to do one more. I'm going to finish. We're going to skip Kaddish because I want to finish on a hopeful note, and I have 6 minutes. And I want to finish on a hopeful note. I want to tell you, and I'm still working on ways to put this into words, but the last poem here is by Rachel Goldberg Polin. Some of you know that I know the Polin family. Rachel's husband, John, and I used to play basketball in Jerusalem. And they spent many Passover holidays at Ramat Darom, the Jewish summer camp in the North Georgia mountains. And Jennifer and I spent many Passovers together with them. We had Shabbos lunch with them in Jerusalem. This is they're a family, and they are known by many, 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 many people in the American Jewish community, and in the community of Anglos in Israel. And her son, Hirsch, before this poem, after this poem was written, as taking place in the 67th day of her son's captivity. And I believe that her son lived past 300 days. I think it was 300 days on the day of the Democratic National Convention, and he was murdered. He was one of the 6 young people who was murdered. And then their bodies were found in tunnels probably 2 or 3 weeks ago. And she, I'm going to give you a slight take on politics just for a moment, which you can feel free to disagree with me. There was a question about, Rachel and John spoke at the Democratic National Convention. There was a question of why Palestinians were not given the opportunity to speak similarly. And I think that there was an opportunity missed for the following reason. I believe that would have been an important moment, but the people who were demanding that were absolutely the wrong people to speak, because the people who were protesting at the Democratic National Convention, like the people who were protesting last night, were not pro-Palestinian, they were anti-Israel. Their language is filled with hate. And if you go back and you watch and you read the words that Rachel spoke, she did not speak out of hate. That her son was being held at that time by Hamas for 300 days. She didn't even demonize or speak a hateful word against Hamas, which I think there's plenty of hateful words to be spoken quite rightfully against Hamas. She didn't speak hatefully about Hamas. She didn't speak hatefully about Palestinians. She spoke out of a deep sense of wanting the suffering to end. And I believe that there is a great disservice that has been done by the Palestinian cause, by protesters like last night, and by the protesters who were vocal outside the Democratic National Convention. And I wish that that they had done their homework and found a compassionate and moral voice within the Palestinian community that I believe exists and that manifests itself in the fact that, for example, Abdullah Antepli and Jamil Kaddour reached out to me last night and said, I'm checking in on you, and I'm sorry that you had to go through that, and this doesn't represent us. I think that Rachel is nothing short of a prophet. And someone in our community sent me an email saying, and it was a beautiful notion. She just said, can we have a Zionism like Rachel's? Right? And that really is what I would strive for. A Zionism that loves our kids, that is committed to our survival and committed to who we are, that it manifests itself in faith and manifests itself in love. In love. And Rachel, in ways that I can't even begin to contemplate, never let her soul give way to anger and to hatred. And so many of us who are not directly affected by the conflict are letting our souls be corroded. She writes a poem. There is a Yiddish lullaby that says, "Your mother will cry 1,000 tears before you grow to be a man. I've cried 1,000,000 tears in the last 67 days. We all have. And I know, way over there is another woman who looks just like me, because we are all so very similar. She has also been crying all those tears. Our sea of tears, they all taste the same. Can we take them, gather them up, and remove the salt, and then pour them over our desert of despair, and plant one tiny seed, a seed wrapped in fear, trauma, pain, and hope, and see what grows? Could it be that this woman, so very like me, that she and I could be sitting together in 50 years, laughing without teeth because we have drunk so much sweet tea together, and now we are so very old, and our faces are creased like worn out brown paper bags, and our sons have their own grandchildren and have long lives, one without an arm, but who needs 2 arms anyways? Is it all a dream, a fantasy, a prophecy? One tiny seed. I'll say 2 words and then I've got to go to PT. Number 1, amen. Amen to this prayer. And number 2, another reason why I found so much redemption in this poem is that the poem was written in English and it was translated to Hebrew. And one other, and this is low on the list of the many things that worry me about the relationship between the American Jewish community and the Israeli Jewish community. But one of the things on my list is that so often it is the Israeli community presuming that they have the answers and that they are here to teach the American Jewish community. And by the way, the Israeli Jewish community has a lot of things to teach us. They can teach us Hebrew, which we should know because it's the language of our people. And the richness that can come when you can speak Hebrew and write in poetry and write in music and write movies and television, the richness that comes out of that culture and the resilience and what it means to stand up for yourselves. There are a lot of things that we can learn, and this is never going to work if it's not a two-way street. And to me, there is something quite redemptive in an Israeli American woman pouring out her heart about her experience as an Israeli, but pouring it out in English and then having those words translated to Hebrew and then be in an Israeli anthology along with the rest. And that too is, as she said, one tiny seed that I hope can continue to grow. Thanks very much.